My name is David Ignatius. I'm a columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post, and it's my pleasure to moderate our discussion this afternoon. As you know from the materials you received, we're here to discuss an issue that has probably vexed most of us more than any other over the past several years, which is the growing tension between Islam and the West, between modernity and traditional societies, between two cultures that, in what's become the inevitable phrase of Samuel Huntington, are in a clash of civilizations. We're also here to discuss an effort to do something about this problem that is being launched by the World Economic Forum, an effort to stimulate dialogue, create projects, and in some way avert this train wreck before it becomes even more devastating. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say a brief word as a journalist about my own sense as I travel the Islamic world of this problem. 22 years ago, when I started covering the Middle East, I lived for a week in a Palestinian village called Halhul, which is just south of Bethlehem, in an attempt to describe what life under Israeli occupation was like for the people who lived there. Last September, I was invited by Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shiite militia, to come and address a conference that they were holding on coverage of the Palestinian issue. And I said to that group that I dreamed that someday Al Jazeera or Al Manar or one of the Arab television stations would send a camera crew to Israel to live with an Israeli family for a week and do the same kind of thing and encourage the same kind of dialogue across cultures. I must say that that suggestion was received with some grumbling from the audience, but it at least provoked a lively discussion. And so that is what I hope for this afternoon. Let me now introduce the members of our panel, who in each case have devoted much of their careers and in some cases have literally staked their lives on doing something about this problem of the clash of civilizations and finding a way out of it. On my far right, Lord Carey of Clifton, who is former Archbishop of Canterbury and is a co-chairman of the Council of 100, about which you'll hear more in a few minutes. To my immediate right is President Musharraf of Pakistan. To my immediate left is Pat Mitchell, who is President and CEO of PBS in the United States, Public Broadcasting System, and someone who over the past few years has become deeply involved in trying to deal with one especially important and difficult aspect of this difference in civilizations, which is the role of women. And on my far left is Anthony Grayling, who is a reader in philosophy at Birkbeck College at the University of London and is a self-described secularist who will conclude our discussions with comments and a challenge to what he's heard from the other panelists. Let me ask Lord Carey to begin. Oh, forgive me. I'm terribly sorry. Prince Turki Al Faisal, who is Saudi ambassador to London and is well known to all of you, even if I didn't manage to look at him as I was doing my introductions, who as a member of the Saudi royal family has been living this question of the clash of civilizations in an especially powerful way. And then finally, Professor Grayling.
David,
now,
may I say something? I
Please.
think you're thinking I'm still in my old job, so that's why you didn't mention me.
I apologize doubly and triply. Let me ask Lord Carey to lead us off by talking a little bit about the Council of 100, what it is, what it hopes to do, and how he came to get so involved in this work.
Thank you, David. As you've given a strict time limit to each of us, I'll do my best to be within the 5 minutes. Before I begin, can I thank the President of Pakistan for the enormous support that he has given to tiny Christian communities in his country, Catholic and Protestant, the Church of Pakistan and so on. As Archbishop, formerly Archbishop of Canterbury, Mr. President, I want to thank you for the support you've given in so many ways, because that may illustrate something of the problem we face in what has been called the clash of civilizations, the fear on both sides of the divide. And I'm honored, together with Prince Turki, to co-chair the Council of 100. And some of you, no doubt, will be asking, what on earth is this beast, a Council of 100? What will it do? Is it yet another piece of bureaucracy? No, it's an action project-centered initiative which has come out of the business community. It comes out of the World Economic Forum, and it comprises 5 elements or 5 bodies: business, media, politics, academics, and faith leaders and NGOs. It's a wholly unique initiative. I mean, I've been involved in interfaith dialogue for many years, and the other faith leaders represented here, CCJ, the Council for Christians and Jews, so many organizations. But this actually goes out of the faith. It involves this multi-stakeholder initiative, to use current jargon. And we're going to be involved in 4 main areas, if I can describe them, and you can pick up the press statement about this. But the 4 areas are as follows: information and communication. We've got to get news out that the West and Islam, to use these stereotypes, can live together. Indeed, we've got to live together. If we're going to make this a better world, a prosperous world, we've got to find ways of living together. And so this is going to be a kind of information clearinghouse to enhance effectiveness in communication. So we begin to break down the stereotypes, the distortions that make the West seem totally secular and Islam totally primitive. We've got to transcend that kind of thing. We have ideas about a media and film initiative that will engage the media and documentary makers in projects and productions. And then there are exchanges, a second great stream. And Ambassador Tom Pickering, who's now Vice President of Boeing, has been very influential in this, and we want to make exchanges at all levels of business, religious leaders, and particularly focusing on people who are not normally drawn into the exchange program. Indeed, David, you already illustrated this when you actually said to the Hezbollah, well, what about finding out how you live in a Jewish community and understand their fears? Then third stream is that of a dialogue of discourse, to engage in inter-civilizational issues. How do we understand secularism? You've mentioned about my friend Anthony Graylin, who's a well-known philosopher, as a secularist. But I think there's a very important dialogue we need to have between faith and the humanist traditions. We've got to find a way of living together. And a track within the World Economic Forum to involve government and corporate leaders in this kind of dialogue. Let's get rid of a silo mentality that our world is the most important world. And then culture, a fourth stream of culture, to enter upon an engagement to promote the values of cooperation and understanding between, for example, service announcements, public broadcasting, and leading sporting personalities at major international sporting events. Who are the great heroes of our day? Well, I can tell you they're not faith leaders. They're not even politicians. They are the great stars of television and, above all, the David Beckhams of this world. How can we engage these people? Do you know, one of our players in England, Rio Ferdinand, earns £70,000 a week. How do you tap into the people who earn these vast sums of money? How can we engage their professionalism to tell a story of integration and cooperation? And we hope every annual meeting there will be a Council of 100 presentation on what we have achieved during the past year. So, David, I hope I've kept within my time limit. Watch this space. We've got energy going into this, and under Prince Turki and myself, with a large number of faith leaders in this very room and business people and politicians who engage in this, we want to change perceptions and to work with other groups. Now, we're only a small organization, but we hope we might be able to deliver something in the days to come.
Well, I know we all look forward to hearing a year from now what the group has accomplished. I should have said at the outset that in addition to chairing the King Faisal Center, Prince Turki is co-chair of this initiative and a crucial guiding person with Lord Kerry. Let me turn now to President Musharraf, who, as I suggested earlier, really does live on the fault line of this clash of civilizations. You've just finished a most remarkable set of meetings with your counterpart in India, Prime Minister Vajpayee, and perhaps you could tell us what you've learned about how to bridge the unbridgeable.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really my honor and a privilege to be talking to all of you. I've been made so conscious of the time factor. There's so much to say, so I'll say less and I'll say it very fast. But I'll be open to any kind of questions later on whatever I've missed out. A remark, sir, by you that Islam is certainly not primitive, but Muslims may be living in backwardness. That has to be differentiated. Islam and the condition of Muslims have to be differentiated, of course. I was obviously going to talk about promotion of inter-civilizational dialogue. But before going into the methods or actions required to promote dialogue, I would firstly like to touch on what factors impede dialogue really, because then only will we be clear on how to promote dialogue. And let me say without any doubt that it is misperceptions, negative mindsets, and attitudinal problems and rigidity at both ends, on the end of the Muslims as well as on the end of the West. I'll take on the West first of all. What is the West perception of Muslims and Islam? First of all, a perception that Islam is a religion of extremism, terrorism, fundamentalism, intolerance. Secondly, that Islam is in conflict with democracy, modernism, secularism. And thirdly, that Muslims refuse to assimilate into the global family. These are the misperceptions, but I call them misperceptions because each one of them is wrong. And I would like to say a few words. First of all, no religion can ever preach militancy and extremism. And so does Islam not preach militancy and extremism. Islam is a religion of peace and of moderation. We must not be misled by the actions of a few extremists. And also that the basis of the basis of extremism, I would like to say, is really political disputes. It is not the religion which is preaching extremism or intolerance. So therefore, coming to the next point of misperception, and that is that Islam is in conflict with democracy and secularism and modernism. Again, I would like to say Islam is most democratic in concept. It believes in human rights. It believes in freedom of speech and expression. It also believes in reaching decisions through a system of consensus. Ijma and ijtihad are words in our religion, that we develop to go to decision through consensus. So this is most democratic. When we are talking of modernism, Islam believes in continuous review of thought, a continuous process of reviewing thought in accordance with time and environment. Therefore, Islam is modern. It remains current. It can never be anchored in the past. And thirdly, as far as secularism is concerned, Islam believes in equal rights to minorities. So therefore, without going into details, when a country like Pakistan is known as a Islamic Republic of Pakistan, it inherently implies that we ought to be democratic, we ought to be secular, and that we ought to be modern in concept. Now, two elements of modernism and assimilation in global family. This needs a little elaboration, and I would like to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, if you see it from a very narrow point of view, in the context of dresses maybe, or social customs and habits, then yes, indeed, there are differences between the West and the Islamic world. But I call this a narrow context, a very narrow-minded and a short-sighted context, which should not be, which is not really the real modernism. Muslims would like to modernize in thinking, in thought process, in the acquisition of knowledge for development and progress. So therefore one has to differentiate between modernism, modernization, and westernizations. While Muslims may not want to westernize, they certainly want to modernize. And modernization needs to be taken in its broader context, in its real context of modernization of progressive thought, progressive vision, of development, knowledge for development and progress of humanity. And therefore, Muslims believe in modernization. Now, I said this is the misperception of the West. Let me come to the misperceptions of the Muslims. I would like to say that there are mindsets on the Muslim side also. And these, as far as the educated class is concerned, there is no problem. They adjust wherever they are living in. But the problem is with the unenlightened, those who hold bigoted views among the Muslims. The problem is with them, because really they tend to shun everything Western, whether it is acquisition of modern knowledge, or even learning of English language, or even for that matter showing interest in music. All these are taken as anti-Islamic. So therefore, the problem of this mindset, negative mindset, is with a minority of the bigoted Muslims. It is a minority. It's not the vast majority. Now, as I said, both of them are wrong, and we need to correct these misperceptions. Now, what actions do we take to promote this dialogue? First of all, I would like to say that there is a requirement of an attitudinal change, a change in mindset, moderation, tolerance, accommodation of each other. This is what is required to promote dialogue. And within this context, I have been talking of a strategy of enlightened moderation. What this strategy really is, it's a two-pronged strategy that I propose. One of the prongs of this strategy is to be delivered by the Muslim world. In that, we need to reject extremism and militancy and go for socio-economic development. And the other prong of this strategy simultaneously has to be delivered by the Western world, in that all political disputes involving Muslims must be resolved with justice. And also, the Western world or the developed world must assist in the socio-economic development of the Muslims. So this is what I called the strategy of enlightened moderation. Within this strategy of enlightened moderation, of course, as I said, assist in socio-economic development. We have to develop a correct economic asymmetry. That is very, very important. We must share wealth equitably and distribute the fruits of globalization equally or evenly, more towards the have-nots. And to close, I would like to say, if we were to analyze why communism failed, the issue is of harmonizing equity with wealth. Communism failed, maybe, as I understand. They focused a lot on equity, equitable distribution of wealth, or advantages, or resources, but they did not develop wealth itself. But when you look at capitalism, there is tremendous amount of wealth, but I'm afraid there is no equity in that. Islam really, in its broadest context, the broad economic theories that are propounded in Islam, believes in harmony of wealth and equity. And this needs to be analyzed, because otherwise we know that capitalism can be extremely ruthless with the poor. With this, I would like to end, and that is as I said, the reasons, I gave out the reasons for no dialogue taking place, and the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Special thanks to President Musharraf for being here and for being willing to take your questions later when we get to question period. Pat Mitchell, as you think about the issue of women in Islam in the West and that great gulf, how do you think about bridging it? What have you learned as you studied the question? What do you hope to do with the Council of 100 as it studies this issue?
Well, David, I am honored and somewhat humbled to be the woman's voice in this discussion. It's a Western woman's voice, of course, but it is a voice that never hesitates to speak up for the importance of a woman's voice in all conversations about inter-civilization dialogue and action, as well as all discussions about partnering in prosperity and security. Because only when women are full partners in every sense of the word, do I believe we will really achieve sustainable prosperity and long-term security. And on that, I would quote Israeli former Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who said last year when asked, what has been the most significant change in the 20th century, answered without a moment's hesitation, the emancipation of women, and then went through country by country to explore the ways in which fully participating women contributed to economic stability and political stability. At last year's World Economic Forum, some of you may have heard the address from Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan. She said something that really motivates my work. She said, we must do everything possible to change the mindsets that limit the possibilities for women, something that President Musharraf spoke to as well. And she outlined some very specific steps that we might take to promote equity and tolerance, to bring financial support for a better financial future for women in the region, and for forging very particular kinds of partnerships and exchanges between Western and Arab women. I've had the privilege of participating in some of those steps. I just want to talk about a couple of them today as the kind of actions that C100 can further take forward. Along with some American colleagues, I visited the Women's Resource Centers in Jordan, some of which were founded by the Princess Basma Foundation. And their impact on the communities they're serving is so measurable, from the job training they're offering, to the counseling on family issues, to the programs that are using arts, theater, and film to help the people in the region, particularly the women and the young people, to find ways to express their own stories, to translate themselves to the rest of the world, to bridge the gap that so often exists in the way media imports and exports images, the images that lead to the misconceptions and misunderstandings. A very substantive exchange of ideas happened, and we made plans to support the microfinance programs that are going on not just in Jordan but throughout the region, again with a very small loan, liberating women to an entirely different kind of economic security. We set up anti-violence programs seeking to provide a new kind of shelter for victims of domestic as well as societal violence. And other programs that are really proving to be transformative because women, Western women, women of Islam, are working together on them. One particular program that I want to note is a partnership, public-private partnership, the kind we've been talking about in this forum, that was set up by Afghanistan President Karzai and the U.S. Department of State under the leadership of the Undersecretary of State, Paula Dobriansky. The purpose of this council was to mobilize resources from the public sector as well as the private sector to provide support for the women of Afghanistan to receive the training, the education that they had been deprived of under Taliban rule. It's been in existence just a little under 3 years. We have helped fund to build schools for girls in Afghanistan. With private funding, we've established women's resource centers similar to the ones in other parts of the region, Egypt and Jordan. We've set up job training, provided on-site health care, particularly in the rural regions, and we've worked with the Afghan Ministry of Women's Affairs to promote full political participation of women. It's a great moment of celebration to look at the new constitution for the new Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and see in it reflected the emancipation of women. We all celebrate that and hope that maybe this time next year Afghanistan will have gone one step further, as has the President of Pakistan and Tunisia, and legislated even further goals for the participation of women in all governing bodies. It's a true model for the West, where women in the U.S. Congress still come to less than 20% representation. Two other successful actions taken by the U.S. Afghan Women's Council, and an action that yesterday the C-100 agreed, highlighted an area of opportunity for us, and that's to take action in the training of a country's artists, its filmmakers, its journalists, its writers, its storytellers. These are the ones who are going to help us combat misconceptions, who are going to help us build the bridges for our productive dialogue. This is an area of particular interest to me, as I spent my entire career as a journalist, both for the American networks and now as the president of the only public service broadcasting in the States. So we took on the task at PBS of taking some of these Afghan women who wanted to be journalists, bringing them to PBS, sending them out in the field with our reporters, our journalists, our producers, teaching them how to use new digital cameras, and sending them home to Afghanistan with the equipment they needed to make their own documentaries. The good news here is that they've now sent us many of the stories that they've told, and one of them, which they call The Other Face of Afghanistan, will be broadcast on PBS this May. And we plan to continue this very positive outcome of one-on-one, personal kind of training and mentoring and the technical support that will help them pursue careers that hopefully will be economically viable, as well as giving them the means to tell the stories that bridge the dialogue. There are opportunities, it seems to me, throughout the Arab world to do this, and C-100 will be looking at some of those opportunities. But I want to say one final word on the subject of financing, because every time we talk about programs like this, we always start to talk about the challenges of finding the resources to fund them. And in yesterday's C-100 meeting, one of our colleagues, Hiba Azat of Cairo University in Egypt, reminded us of something I think is always important to remember at that point when we tend to get disengaged and say, well, all that sounds good, but how do we actually fund these programs? She said, don't spend so much time thinking about how we go and get funds from somewhere else. Let's follow the example of women who have traditionally and out of necessity started with what they have at hand, our own talents, our own resources, and what better way to keep the dialogue going. So I'd like to end by quoting Her Majesty Queen Rania again, because she said this so often. Development will not achieve its goals unless women participate in it as complete and effective partners in all the fields. We are in this together. We, the West and Islam, share a common future. So that is my hope, that with the C-100 and the beginning of this inter-civilization dialogue, we can take the actions that help tell our own stories, a story of trust, partnership, and hope.
Prince Turki, you're one of the co-chairs of this initiative, but you also come from a country where the tensions between modernity and tradition, to some extent between Islam and the West, seem sometimes to be potentially explosive. And I wonder if you could talk about some of your experience as a Saudi leader in trying to deal with those tensions and bridge those gaps in what some people often describe as a conflict within Islam, not simply between Islam and the West.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to refer to my youth as an example of what stereotypes can lead people to think about others. When I first went to America to do my studies, I was 14 years old. And arriving by boat to New York Harbor, the only image in my mind as we were entering that harbor is the image of cowboys and Indians. And this was, of course, a reflection of the expanding at the time importance and influence of American culture, and particularly through the film media. And when I got to the school, the first question that I was asked by many of my fellow students was, do you live in a tent? And I would answer them, yes, a 4-story tent. And some of them believed me and some did not. But that's the kind of stereotyping, I think, that over the last, I won't say how many years since that was, has not changed, but on the other hand, it has increased, I think, the stereotyping, and turned into, perhaps on both sides, as President Musharraf said, into more, if you like, vicious pictures of each other's intentions and aims, and even characters and personalities. And the C-100, I think, is one of the very many groups that hope to overcome these problems. But it has chosen for itself a route, I think, that perhaps others have not, and that is to do these things through practical projects where people-to-people contact, implementation of projects, implementation of workshops and other activities that can bring people together and put people in other people's places to make them understand and get better understanding of each other's drives and each other's ambitions and each other's problems. These are the only ways, I think, that we as Muslims and the rest of the world community can get to know each other better. I remember in 1966, in response to a message that Pope Paul VI had made in one of his talks at the Vatican, calling for people of faith to come together, that the late King Faisal, at the very important speech that he gave annually during the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage season, he accepted that call in public from the Pope and urged that there be coordination and consultation between Muslims and non-Muslims. And as a result of that, the first Saudi delegation departed a few months later to the Vatican, where there was held contact for the first time between Saudi delegation and the Vatican. And one of the remarkable things of that event, reported at the time but soon forgotten, I think, is that when it came to prayer time, while the delegation was at the Vatican, and the head of the Saudi delegation, who was the Minister of Justice at the time, turned to his interlocutors from the Vatican and said, it is time for our prayers. The man from the Vatican said, all right, if you would like to go back to the hotel and pray and then come back, we will wait for you. And he told him, no, we'll pray here. This is a house of God, isn't it? And sure enough, they brought the prayer mats and they prayed. And it is that kind of spirit and understanding, I think, that has, if you like, decreased or in some cases even disappeared in recent years. As a result, I think on both sides as well, of the rise of extremists and extremist ideology, not just in Islam, but I think in all of the faiths. And as a political tool, and this is where I agree with President Musharraf as well, it is politics that makes people into extremists, not their faiths, and definitely not their social upbringings. And it is those who try to hijack faith for the service of their political aims that do the worst damage to their societies and other people's well-being and goodness even. So from that, I'll go back to the kingdom, as David Ignatius always will refer me back to that issue. The kingdom is in the middle of a change in social and economic and political reform. It is a reform that is inclusive of all levels of society, from the mass populace to the leadership. And it is a reform that is being driven, if you like, and led in all cases by a leadership that has recognized that the reform is necessary in order to overcome what we face today in Saudi Arabia. And what do we face? We face a growing population. We face a problem of extremism that has led to terrorism for the first time in many years to strike in Saudi Arabia. It has led to economic expectations having to be curtailed. It has led to shortcomings in educational standards, etc. But the important thing about what is happening today in Saudi Arabia is that all of these factors have become the center of public dialogue. And within the framework of the public dialogue program that the Crown Prince initiated at the beginning of last year, there have been several sessions held that dealt with specific issues. The next one and the next couple of months is going to be about the role of women in Saudi Arabia. And that, I think, will draw a lot of attention, not just from Saudi Arabia, but from outside Saudi Arabia. And it is going to be dealt with on all of its aspects. What is women going to do in Saudi Arabia? What is the role of women? How will women participate? What rights do they have? What rights have been abrogated by the society of the women, etc. So it is this ferment in the kingdom, I think, that is a hallmark now of what is happening in the kingdom. And it is a ferment that is inspired by the Saudi Arabian people themselves on all levels, as I said. We recognize that in order for us to progress to a better world, that we have to change some of our either customs or long-held beliefs that may have been holding us back. And it is not new to the kingdom. Those of you who know the history of Saudi Arabia will remember that from day one in Saudi Arabia, in 1932, the issue of reform was always on the mind of the Saudi people and their leadership. And that reform took the form of developing from a tribal, almost city-state type of political structure and social structure into a unified institution-led social and political cohesion. And we're still in the process of developing our political institutions. And that is why when the king last May, in his speech to the Council of Majlis Shura, the Consultative Assembly, proposed that there be, for example, more participatory activity in the political field. 2 months after that, there was a program that was approved by the Council of Ministers for elections to be held a year later to the municipal councils. And that, as a first step, is an important step, because if the first step is solid and strong, then you can take many other steps after that. But when you take a hesitant step, and it is something that is not based on solidity and on concrete capabilities, then the danger of either going back or retreating is there, and we must avoid that at all levels. So we're in the process of change, and that change will include not just the economic, social, and religious factors, but also the political factors. And I see David is sort of looking at me to tell me that the time is finished.
No,
Thank you.
that was very, very helpful, and thank you. Let me now ask Professor Grayling to conclude this part of our discussion. You've heard some very articulate expressions of people's feelings about this issue. What do you think, as a philosopher, as a thoughtful observer, about what you've heard?
Well, first, I think it's important just to remind ourselves of what is meant by talk of secularism, since something I'm going to say in a moment will make use of that concept. A secularist is not necessarily a person who is against religion. Rather, he is somebody who thinks that the public domain might be a space where all religions can have their life and flourish without being oppressed by the privileging of one religion in that space. So secularism is really about neutrality and about making a space available for lots of different viewpoints to flourish. So that's an important point to remember. Now, I often think that in this discussion about perceptions West to the Islamic world and vice versa, that we in the West suffer from what might be called the liberal paradox or the liberal dilemma, which is that we're anxious to be tolerant and kind and to listen to the other party and not to put our own point of view too strongly because it might seem as if we're, being over-assertive. And in consequence, we sometimes fail to register a very important fact about what the West means to itself. Most people who think about the very important ideas of individual liberty and rights and a rule of law and a public neutral space in which people can express themselves and flourish and make their own way and take opportunities. When people talk about that, they do it conscious, I think, of the fact that these liberties, these freedoms, these rights have been very, very hard won. If you look back over the last 500 or 600 years from the time of the Reformation, and you think about the variety of struggles which have been undergone by people in the Western tradition against hegemony over thought, against absolute monarchy, a struggle for rights of workers, a struggle for enfranchisement of women, a struggle against slavery. There have been any number of endeavors to try to provide to the generality of people what was once just the possession of a very few. Only the aristocrats, only the people with power and wealth in society once enjoyed opportunities and freedom and could express themselves properly. Now this is a possession of the generality. And as I say, because it's been very hard won, it's very sincerely held. And this is something that when there's a dialogue between the West and non-Westerners, that Westerners ought to remember. We're very serious, we're very sincere about this important set of values that we have fought for and that we believe in now. Now, of course, among these values are those of tolerance, or those of listening, in the ideal. Of course, there are plenty of people in the Western world who are prejudiced and bigoted and ignorant, and those three things are great barriers to understanding, and they are a source of conflict and strife. But we in the West are not alone in having bigots and prejudiced people and people who won't listen to the other side of any argument. But those of us who will recognize instantly, I mean, when we sit here and we listen to the President speaking so eloquently about what Islam really is, and when we listen to Prince Turki talking about the kinds of reforms that Saudi Arabia aspires to, we in the West hear things that are very familiar to us. So when we talk about, the title of this session is Healing the Clash of Civilizations, I don't think it's about healing, and I don't think it's about clash. Nor do I think there is a real opposition of civilizations here, because so much is held in common between these two great traditions. You have to remember, when I teach my students at university, talk about the ideas of Aristotle and Plato, we wouldn't have them now had it not been for the scholars of Islam who had preserved these texts for us and re-educated the West when so much had been lost. So our roots are intermingled, and the two civilizations are not different, although they have important differences. They share so much in common that what one needs to do is to emphasize these commonalities as a background against which we can tackle the genuine differences and disagreements that exist. And they do exist, there's no question about it. There are many people in the West who value and prize the idea of individual liberty, including the liberty of women, and providing opportunities to women, who look at the Islamic world and see, in parts at least of the Islamic world, that those enfranchisements don't exist there. And so one asks a question, one offers a challenge, one wants to understand better why they don't. one's perfectly aware, of course, that many of the things that people in the Islamic world value are valued with as great sincerity as we value our own traditions in the West. So this is a dialogue between people who are very sincere about their outlooks. But it's a mark of civilized behavior that we ought to be able to discuss not only those things we share in common, but our differences in a way which is peaceful and civilized. And it seems to me that we are in danger of losing sight of the fact that there is so much. It's so much in the way of good manners and civilization out there on both sides of the dialogue that we really ought to have a great deal of hope about keeping that dialogue going in very fruitful ways. So this isn't, as it seems to me, about a clash. It's about preventing a clash. It's about preventing a clash between people on both sides of the argument who don't understand, don't listen, don't want to listen, have their prejudices, and they're always in the minority. So the rest of us, I think, have to try to provide the kind of context in which we can say, look, this is what we agree on, this is where we disagree, let's have a civilized discussion about the disagreements, but let's remember that we're very sincere about the values that our respective sides of the argument hold.
Thank you very much. Before turning to the audience for your questions, I want to take the privilege of the chair to put a question of my own to President Musharraf. We've had a discussion here that really has focused on ideas and in Professor Grayling's phrase has been civilized, and yet we're all mindful that back home there have been 2 recent attempts on your life, and we're mindful of just how serious these issues are as you and other leaders face them. And the question that I would put to you is, you said your own strategy in Pakistan is one of enlightened moderation. And I'm wondering how the West can help you in that strategy and how it can make it more difficult for you in executing that strategy.
Well, the strategy of enlightened moderation that I spoke of is really not particularly for Pakistan, it's for the whole world. It's a strategy that we all need to adopt, how to bring harmony and peace into the world. Because at the moment, I have enunciated what the Muslims feel. They feel deprived. They feel they are in a state of hopelessness. And therefore, it's leading to extremist acts from their side. So what I called enlightened moderation was a 2-pronged strategy to be delivered by the Muslim world on one side and by the West on the other side. Both these prongs have to succeed if at all we move, if we want to move forward. So that is for the world to undertake. On our side, the Muslim prong that I spoke of, rejecting extremism and going for socio-economic development. We took this up in the OIC summit at Kuala Lumpur last year, in the last summit, and we have decided to create a commission, a special commission, to look into the restructuring of the OIC for the purpose of promoting enlightened moderation. So I think the Muslim prong has already been put into execution. We need to take it further. The Western prong of resolving political disputes so that this feeling of hopelessness, the feeling of deprivation in the Muslim world is eliminated, and also assisting the Muslim world in socio-economic development has to be executed successfully. Because what leads to extremism is political disputes, is poverty, is lack of education. So these are the areas, the social sector, where the Muslims have to be assisted. Now, having said that about the world and the Muslim world, I would like to say, as far as Pakistan is concerned, yes, in Pakistan, we are fighting terrorism in all its forms. We are fighting the Al-Qaeda and Taliban on the western borders, and we want to negotiate a peaceful settlement of the Kashmir dispute with the Indians on the eastern border. At the same time, we are fighting extremism and sectarian and religious extremism within our country. So therefore, really, I am treading on a lot of toes, and that has led to these extremist attacks on me. But I call them occupational hazards, and I also believe that I haven't outlived my 9 lives as yet. I have a number of lives left still. I am very confident.
We're pleased that the 9 are intact, and hope we won't get above 5. Let me turn to the audience, because I know you have questions. I see many hands. I would ask you please to identify yourselves as you ask your questions, and please, if the question is for a particular member of the panel, direct it to that member. And yes, please.
My name is Mustafa Ceric. I am the Grand Mufti of Bosnia. This is a great pleasure for me to greet President of Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I take great pride to inform you that I am a student of a Pakistani teacher, Fazlur Rahman, my mentor. He wrote a book on Islam. I don't know whether you are reading this book in Pakistan or not. But in the West, this book is very well read. I would recommend you to read, not because he was my mentor, but book is very good. My question for President Musharraf is, I heard in Bosnia that you said, we Pakistanis and Indians will not be forever enemies. I would like to reflect on that, because it's not only a political move, but I think it's deeper motivation for that statement. I would like you to comment on that. And my question goes, next question is to Mr. Grayling about secularism. I think we all live in a crisis. We who say that we believe in God, and you who say that you are neutral, as if God doesn't exist. I had an experience with the gentleman who said, I am secularist. So I asked him, could you define yourself, how you are secularist? He said, I am secularist because I don't go to church. So I said to him, I am secularist too, because I don't go to church either, I go to mosque. So my question is really, how you reconcile this European secularism with the fact that many states, European states, have the flag, the cross. I am a European Muslim. How can I believe you that you are secularist if I have to take as a soldier and die in the name of the cross on the country in which I live? Thank you.
President Musharraf, do you want to begin?
Yes, indeed. So, yes, I made that remark because I really feel that in this era of geoeconomics, South Asian region is the only region which is not cooperating among itself for economic benefits of the people of the region. And we are the most backward at that, probably. And we are 1/5 of humanity living there. And the main cause of this is the conflict between India and Pakistan. There is so much opportunity of mutual economic benefits which we are wasting because Pakistan and India are in conflict. I very strongly believe that we must not live perpetually in enmity. So therefore, with all sincerity, I have tried my best to go along with the process of normalization. And I'm very glad that mutually we agreed on a way forward. And why I'm very hopeful of the future is that now there is a realization on both sides that we need to address all issues through a composite dialogue, and all issues must include the dispute of Kashmir, because I am afraid that is the main cause of our confrontation. And also that Kashmir dispute needs to be resolved for peace in the region, and also that Pakistan is a party to the dispute in this region. So I'm very hopeful that we will move forward, inshallah, on a path of dialogue, on a path of peace with India, and put the confrontationist course behind. We need the backup and support of the world to take the dialogue process forward to address all issues, including Kashmir. I am very hopeful of that.
Professor Grayling.
Well, I'm grateful to the Grand Mufti for giving me an opportunity to clarify what I said about secularism. I said at the outset, and I repeat now, that to be a secularist is not to be against religion, or either in general or in any of its particular manifestations. You could be a Christian secularist or a Muslim secularist. To be a secularist is just to believe that the public domain, the state, is a neutral space, a space where all interests can be accommodated, and where, therefore, values of tolerance and mutual understanding are of great importance. Of course, there are secularists who are agnostics or atheists and who are hostile to religion and who have a quarrel with it, who don't believe that there are supernatural agencies in the world, and so on. And that's fair enough. There's a debate to be had there. There are humanists who think that the basis of ethics is to be found in facts about the human condition and the natural world, and not in revealed scripture or in other places. But that's an argument which is separate from the secular one. And perhaps I can just a very quick anecdote to illustrate why some secularists are very eager to put their point. Last month in December, I had the good fortune to be in a very short space of time in Istanbul, and then shortly afterwards in Rome. When I was in Istanbul, I read on the front page of the English language newspaper that a judge in court had ordered a woman from court because she was wearing the hijab, and it's a secular state, and that was taken as a religious symbol, and she refused to remove it, and so she was removed from the court, and she was the defendant in the case, and the case proceeded in her absence, which seemed to be rather strong medicine. Then I went on to Rome, and there I saw on the front page of the newspaper that a Muslim father had petitioned the local authorities to remove crucifixes from the walls of the school where his Muslim children were being educated. Now, it seems to me that those two examples, coming as they did together, illustrate very well why secularism matters. It matters because the kinds of conflicts that are exemplified there can be avoided in a respectful and tolerant situation where people in the public domain, at any rate, meet as human beings, not as carriers of labels, but are still free to express themselves in whatever way they wish in their own time and with their own group.
Thank you. Tom Fenton.
Tom Fenton of CBS News. Sorry. My question is for Prince Turki, and it is, does the effort of the Bush administration to promote American-style democracy in the Middle East help or hinder dialogue between Islam and the Western world?
I think sharing advice between friends is useful. And I can assure you that many Saudis have many words of advice for President Bush and the American people. But to be open-minded to accept advice, I think, is important in today's world. Because we see that the old notion of nation states and territorial integrity is gradually wearing down, I think, and more people are going into larger communities. And you have the European Union, where I don't know how many nationalities now are represented on it, and historical differences that lasted for hundreds of years have been overcome, and traditional borders have been erased from the map. That seems to be spreading all over the world, where larger communities are coming about as a result of today's not just social and political and economic developments, but the developments of science as well are moving towards that way. So it helps to hear from your friends what they think you're doing. But I think the important thing about reform in our part of the world, as I'm sure it is in every other part of the world, is that people have to realize and have to appreciate that they have to go through the struggles for their own identity, like Professor Grayling was saying about Europe and the West. The West had to go through many crises to become what it is today, and therefore it can expound on these issues from the fact that it has paid the price of going through that process of identifying itself and overcoming these difficulties. And we in the Arab and Islamic world are in that process, as we have been, as I told you, and the reform process is not, was not born yesterday. It's coming through a long time. And one thing I would add is that, as a clarification, is that in many of us in the Muslim world, the struggle for identity has been in the process of fighting colonialism. And so you find that any semblance or a hint of a return to or a similar attitude as practiced in previous colonial occupations of these areas, there'll be great resistance to it. And the issues of today's happenings in Iraq and Palestine and other places in the world today reflect that.
Yes, in the first row, please, 6 seconds.
I'm Sigmund Sternberg, co-founder of the Three Face Forum in London. First of all, I would like to say how delighted I am to see Mr. Musharraf here, because I'm a friend of his High Commissioner in London, who incidentally is a lady. So it's, and she's a supporter of ours, and she comes and she sends a representative to our meeting, and how delighted we are that we are here today. I have in front of me an article which was published in the International Herald Tribune on Thursday, the 8th of January. I'm not going to read the article out, but I urge you to look it up in the web. It's with Aya Bayoumi, and the title of the article is Muslims in Europe Face Widespread Abuse. I mean, that sums up the situation. I must tell you, when we formed the Three Face Forum, together with Sheikh Zaki Badawi, we have entered a very interesting area in the existence of Christian-Jewish-Muslim relations. Recently, Dr. Zaki Badawi, myself, and the representative of the Catholic Church, we went to the BBC complaining about a program. We have listened very carefully, and I believe the result that Mr. Kilroy Silk, who presented a program which made some very repulsive references to the Muslim, he was just suspended. And I believe that the media is willing to listen. What we should really do when we come across the media, we should immediately protest, because they do take notice of our protest. I mean, we haven't got much money to spend a great deal of public relations about improving the image, but what is in our hand, we can always do. We can always email and we can always write, and people do take notice. And this Kilroy Silk episode showed me quite clearly what you can do without money.
I'm going to take that as if it's a question directed at the chair, since I'm from the media. You know, I think that the simple and honest answer is that you need to hold us to account to live up to our own rules. Our business promises to be fair, to listen to both sides, to tell the truth and report it accurately and fairly. I'm astonished at how often we fail in that mission, but every time we do, you know, I think it's important that people hold us to account, and I think that's especially true on this issue. Please.
May I chip into this? Watching the media, really, and on the projection of Islam, may I say, in the Western media, one sees that either Islam is seen through the eyes of an extremist on one side, a religious extremist, who has very extreme views on religion, which do not project the real values of Islam, or they are seen on the other side through the eyes of an ultra-modern personality, who maybe disowns their own religious values, cultural values, while the moderates in between, who are the vast majority, remain out of the loop. Frankly, there is a dire necessity of seeing who is being projected for Islam on the media. It shouldn't be the extremists of either end. It must be the moderates in between, who really will come out with the real values of Islam as they exist in the world.
We have on our panel our very own media mogul, who is Pat Mitchell, who runs a television network in the United States. Pat, how do you respond to this?
Well, I began by responding that media is far too important to be left to the marketplace. And it's also far too important to be left to itself. And that is why it is so critical that you exercise exactly the right that you did on this particular instance, knowing nothing of the details. But we need to hear from the people that we serve. On this issue of how we have portrayed the rest of the world, we have failed miserably, certainly on the television side, and even, I would venture to say, among other media forms as well. Since the end of the Cold War, American media turned inward. And before September 11, 2000, there was very few stories you could find of any kind, certainly about Islam. And in fact, if I might just toot PBS's horn for just a moment, we aired a program called The History of Islam in 1999. The audience was very small. Had a commercial network attempted this, it would have been argued not popular, not profitable, therefore can't do it, which is why I argue you must have public service broadcasters, even though they sometimes fall short, as you noted. But of course, when we aired it again with a different kind of relevance and a different need for understanding, there was a huge audience. So we can't wait until there's a need or a sudden relevance that emerges from a headline, a tragic headline. But in fact, we need to be there covering the story all the time. And we cannot do that without the dialogue that we've been talking about here. We can't do it among ourselves without having outside counsel and advice. I'm happy to say many of the people I see here today participated in another program that we did called Muhammad Legacy of a Prophet, in which we attempted to interpret Islam through the lives of Muslims living in the West. And the response, again, was so extraordinary because many of the American public had never seen or understood Islam in the way that they could understand it through these personal stories. So I consider it a huge responsibility as a public service broadcaster. Gratefully, we can choose our subjects by whether or not they serve, but I wish to do just as the gentleman suggests, hold all media accountable.
Lord Kerry?
Well, I just want to come in on this and to express my gratitude to Sir Siggy Sternberg for his energy in the United Kingdom and around the world. I think we owe him so much over the last, his whole lifetime. But I think this particular question is very important. You see, what Kilroy said, all Arabs are rapers of women and limb amputators. And it's a breathtaking statement. He said more than that. And he said it in such a way that has alarmed many people. Now, I want to assure people the majority of British people do not believe that or act in that kind of way. It has to be said, though, that he touched a popular nerve. That's why one paper, the Daily Express, is supporting him and saying he's entitled to speak his mind freely. Now, that's confusing freedom of speech with responsible behavior on the part of a media personality. Now, if only he had said, there is a very important question here that the West asks of Islam. We look at these practices and we want to raise a question. We want to enter a dialogue. He didn't. He missed an opportunity. That's why the enlightened moderation is the way we've got to go. we've got to be in a position to value one another's traditions, so that I, as a Christian, can look at Islam and say, why can't we have a church in Saudi Arabia? Now, it's a very proper question, and I'm sure there's answers to that, but that will only come out of friendship. That will only come out of friendship and respect for one another and valuing Islam. And I want to say, over the years, I really have understood more deeply than ever what Islam has to offer the West. And we should embrace the similarities, enter more deeply into the difficulties as friends, as fellow citizens who want to make this earth a better place. So I want to say to Kilroy, you've missed a wonderful opportunity and you deserve to be suspended.
He sounds like a project for the Council of 100. Let me return to the audience. I have a long list of speakers already. Yes. Prince Turki, yes.
I don't want to sound like I'm defending the media, but when I got to London as ambassador last January, within 2 weeks, Saudi Arabia was being lambasted again in the British press. And I got calls from Saudi Arabia saying, do something about that. Why are they like that? Why are they always picking on Saudi Arabia? And then 2 weeks later, I went through the British papers very carefully and so on, and called back my bosses in Saudi Arabia and said, look at how they treat the British government. And look at how they treat the British royal family. I think the press, as the President Musharraf said, goes for the extremes in whatever situation arises. And hence, that's the thing that sells the newspapers. It is unfortunate, but we have to accept that. And I wish we had more people like David Ignatius on the press who could perhaps rectify that situation for us.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the audience, and the gentleman in the first row, please.
Michael Fitzgerald. I'm the president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue in the Vatican. A question to Lord Carey and Prince Turki about the Council of 100. The title of this session mentions the clash of civilizations. I would like to refer to a clash of symbols. Not symbols, but symbols. Last Saturday there was a remarkable concert for reconciliation in the Vatican, and from my point of view I was looking directly at the percussionist, and he had to prepare himself at various times of the Mahler Symphony to clash the cymbals, which were very sonorous and didn't do any harm to anyone. But of course this clash of cymbals would be useless, really, without the rest of the orchestra. And my question is, we've been talking about Islam and the West. What is going to be the role of the other religions in the Council of 100? Not just Islam, Christianity, but there is also Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism. Is this foreseen?
I'm grateful to the Archbishop. I think, yes, we want to involve everybody, but unless we have a clear focus, we're likely to fudge the issue. And the focus is Islam and the West. Not the West, Islam and the West, I want to put it. Now, we're comparing a geographical region, West, with a whole area of culture and religion. Now, that's a very, very unequal thing, and furthermore, Islam is in the West. But we're using these really as stereotypes. They represent certain realities in the world today. So Hinduism and Judaism is clearly in the West and throughout the world. And we want their participation. Indeed, we have some very prominent Jews on that particular body, one sitting on your left, I believe. And it may well be you've pointed up a very important omission. Maybe we do need to get representatives of other faiths who can make a contribution to the Council of 100. But we're on a journey together, and there's more unravelling to be done.
I cannot say anything other than to agree with Lord Carey. But just referring back to Lord Carey's question and the previous answer that he gave on why churches are not open in Saudi Arabia, and it's very important for me to comment on that and not let it go. In Islam, we recognize all of the prophets, from Noah all the way to Muhammad. And in both Judaism and Christianity, you don't recognize our prophet as a prophet of God. And hence, should you do so, you don't even have to build churches. You can come to our mosques and pray. And that is the reason why mosques are not open in Saudi Arabia.
I just have been notified that we are going to have to clear the auditorium when our session ends. So let me ask you to keep your questions brief, and we'll try to keep our responses brief too. The gentleman there who I recognize, yes, you.
Khalid Janai from Bahrain. It's a question to Lord Carey and a point to Pat. Lord, just picking up from the last question, I mean, it's very noble what C100 is doing, but let's not forget in the Islamic world, we have a minority there, which is basically Christians and non-Christians. And these minorities, actually, they are very strong minority from an intellectual perspective, business perspective, and power. And I think they should be included because from the West perspective, they are brushed as one, they are Muslims living in the Muslim world. So I think it's very important to include those. From a Pat, just a point, I mean, it's very pleasing to hear the successes in Afghanistan and Jordan. But let's not forget, there is a country called Iran where women, for 25 years, have been engaged with it politically, socially, economically, even in the media side. I mean, we have a young lady who's 24 years old, and she's won Cannes for being the best director. Thank you very much.
Yes, Pat.
Well, I would just acknowledge that I've seen her film, and it's extraordinary. And recently at the Sundance Film Festival, 5 of the international documentaries were produced from the region, 3 from Iran. And we certainly look to the women there for great role models and creating the dialogue that film and storytelling can do.
Lord Carey.
Just make a response. You address the question to me too. If you've got suggestions to make, please offer them to us. At the Council of 100, at the World Economic Forum, we will pay careful attention.
The gentleman here who had his hand up a moment ago.
I'm Shekhar Gupta. I edit the Indian Express. And just because I come from India, President Musharraf, I'm not picking up issue with you on Kashmir. I'm asking you a question which, in fact, I wish a Pakistani journalist had asked. If you say, as you said, that the instincts of an Islamic republic should be fundamentally democratic, how do you, first of all, justify the coup that you successfully staged to remove a government which may have been corrupt and incompetent, most of them are, but it had 2/3 majority? Second, if the instincts of the state are democratic, how come Pakistan has had a history of so many successful military coups and not one that failed? And third, sir, since we know that your instincts are democratic because you have democratized in many areas since you've taken over power, what are you now doing to build institutions and structures so military coups are not necessary in future, and if they do take place, they don't succeed?
Well, first of all, about myself, I did not take over. I was in the air when things happened on the ground. And when I landed, I had taken over. Because people took over on my behalf, and they installed me as the head. I didn't do it. I didn't even know what is happening on the ground. I salute my supporters who did all that. However, let me say, as far as democracy is concerned, yes, in Pakistan, over the history, maybe democracy has not flourished and did not succeed. There have been military takeovers. I don't want to get into the reasons or rationale of that. But now we have tried to correct the situation. We analyzed why democracy did not succeed, and we have found the answers. And we have, I think, implemented those answers because we want sustainable democracy introduced in Pakistan. Now, I want to leave the history behind, and I'm reasonably sure that we have introduced measures in democracy which will ensure its sustainability in the future. That's all that I would like to say. And I'm sure you'll see sustainable democracy going on in Pakistan.
The young lady in the first row, please, in the hijab.
Thank you for the compliment. I'm not young. I just wanted to engage with Professor Grayling that I think that as we mentioned in different sessions in the Religious Leaders Forum as well as C100 and different panels, that there are different secularisms and there are different democracies. And this is not to fall into the trap of specificity, that no one should mind tell us what to do because we have specific culture, etc. I think that we have a humanist common ground, but as much as I think that your ideas and words were very inspiring, as much as I disagree. I've been studying Western Anglo-American secularism for the past 10 years, and I can see that you have as many schools of fiqh as we have in Sharia. You know, it's like, it's amazing. And to do the American political thought some justice, because the over-militarization of the American foreign policy sometimes obscures in interesting philosophical debates regarding secularism and democracy in the States, in the academia. There is a debate that has been going on now for about 10 years about whether religion is a conversation stopper. This is the idea of the pragmatists, or those who defend religion as being religious in the public area, in the public sphere, that we should step into the public sphere as Christians, as Jews, as Muslims, as Hindus, and then this is the challenge, how to coexist together as being affiliated with our faith and as equal citizens as well. And this is the challenge, really the matrix or the formula that is much more challenging to embed it in democracy as well, instead of just excluding those who believe or attacking those who have different ideas of how democracy should be run everywhere. My last word is that we cannot afford misunderstandings anymore. On your behalf, you know that the security price is very high. On our behalf as well, we see when we try to go on the effort of understanding Islam in a humanist, pluralist way, not transform it, but understand it differently, that when you in the West, if I adopt this category, betray sometimes in politics and even in thought the virtues of liberal original stances regarding individual freedom and liberties, we pay a price because we become discredited. They say this is the West that has been claiming to be so. And I think that one of the biggest issues that will take place on the top of the agenda in the Muslim societies, I don't talk about Muslim intellectuals, but societies, is how France is dealing with this issue of religious symbols. And to stress again, the Islamic, the French version of secularism, the Rousseau version of civil religion is much more different than the Lockean, notion of secularism.
Anthony, why don't you take a shot at that?
Well, that was a very rich set of observations and a lot of questions rather than one. So I'll try to answer very briefly by just picking up one point implied in what you say. I think it's important that we should remember that we have in the West our own problems with the secular project. I live in a country, the United Kingdom, which is not a secular state. It doesn't have church-state separation. It has an established church, which until about 170 years ago was such that unless you subscribed to the 39 Articles, you were disabled socially from entering Parliament, from going to the universities, from many things in life. And that's a pretty recent part of our story. We've got a de facto secular society now, but that's because the British are on the whole pretty good at fudging things and forgetting things, and so we act as if we're a secular state, even though we're not. A better example, perhaps, is the United States of America. Everybody knows that last year a judge in Alabama put up the Ten Commandments chiseled on stone in the garden of his courtroom, I think it was, and there was a debate there. It went all the way to the Supreme Court of the state, and the Ten Commandments were forcibly removed. Now, this is in a country where something like 97% of people who live in the country claim to have a religious commitment of some kind. It's a very religious country in many ways, but it's also fiercely jealous of its secular status, of the idea that
its founding fathers had left Europe precisely so that they could be free religiously, precisely so that people with differences of opinion could nevertheless live side by side and pursue their own projects without interference. The essential thing about secularism on the Western model is that the public domain. I mean, in the French situation, of course, is a very difficult and delicate one because, as a result of deep-rooted 1789 style thoughts about the secular state, the feeling is that a line has to be drawn in the sand, and these two young women who want to wear their veils to school have turned out to be that line, and it makes it very difficult for both sides of the argument, really. But the thought is that in order to preserve a principle, in order to organize a society on the basis that what the public provides, what the state, what the majority of people have agreed to provide in the way of services, ought to be genuinely neutral with respect to all the people who benefit from those goods that are provided, all those social goods. Nobody is saying that the young ladies in question in France can't wear their veils outside of school or at weekends or make other choices. It's difficult, I agree, and one would prefer that the French would behave as we do in the United Kingdom. We just don't mind, we just don't notice, and we let people express themselves as they will. But the examples that you bring up don't, I think, derail the project of trying to argue that our chance of living with one another in peace really does depend upon all of us, all sides of the argument, really making the effort to open a space for other people and their ways of doing things.
With sincere apologies to all of the people that I have not been able to recognize, I am being signaled that we really must bring this to an end. Let me, in 30 seconds, just sum up our discussion. Lord Kerry and Prince Turki have done something quite wonderful today in launching very publicly and openly a project that they will be focusing on over the next year. And in a sense, inviting all of us to hold them accountable, to watch them, to help them in whatever ways we can. Despite President Musharraf's great modesty in talking about occupational hazards, he reminded us of the seriousness of this effort that begins today with this formal launching. You were here at the takeoff of this project, but it is one that's enormously serious, and I know that all the people on the Council of 100, President Musharraf, and all of the leaders who are gathered here know that everyone in the audience will be thinking about them and about their struggles over the year to come. So thank you very much, all of you.